Alina had never asked for pity. She never wanted attention or sympathy or some heroic spotlight shining on her. All she ever really wanted was peace. A quiet, normal day where she didn't have to worry about who would snicker when she walked, by who would whisper behind her back in class, or what cruel nickname she'd be given that week. But from the moment she stepped into that school, it was as if her silence made her a target. She was different, not in the loud, obvious way people sometimes admire, but in the subtle, unnoticeable way they often ignore or mock. She wore old clothes because her family couldn't afford new ones. She ate her lunch alone, not because she was antisocial, but because no one ever invited her to sit beside them. And when the teacher asked questions, she knew the answers, but she rarely raised her hand. She had learned that attention in her world usually led to embarrassment. So she made herself small, not because she lacked value, but because the world around her didn't know how to see it. But in the silence of her loneliness, something was happening. Something that even she didn't fully understand at the time. Every time someone laughed at her and she didn't cry in front of them, she was building strength. Every time she chose to keep going, even when it felt like the world was pushing her down, she was learning resilience. And every time she came home with a heavy heart but still finished her homework, still helped her mother cook, still found time to read quietly before bed, she was developing the discipline that would one day become her foundation. No one saw those small victories. No one clapped for her. But she was winning battles every single day, battles within herself. And they were shaping her into someone extraordinary. It would have been easy and understandable for Alina to become bitter, to grow up resenting the world, hating the people who hurt her, closing herself off to kindness or trust. But she didn't. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that holding on to pain would only make it grow. So instead she poured her energy into her books, into her dreams, into a future that no one else could see for her, but that she believed in. She imagined a life where she could walk into a room and not feel shame. A life where she could make her own choices, define her own worth, and maybe, just maybe, help others do the same. And that hope, fragile as it was, became her light in the darkness. When high school ended, so did the daily bullying, but not the memories. They followed her like shadows. But Alina, now a young woman, carried them with a quiet grace. She used them not as excuses but as fuel. She studied harder, worked longer hours, took jobs that others might turn down just to pay for college. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, days when the pressure felt unbearable, and moments when she questioned if it was all worth it, but she kept going. Because deep down she remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and she promised herself she'd never let that happen again, not to her, and not to anyone she could help in the future. Years passed. Degrees were earned, skills were mastered. Confidence was built, slowly, humbly, honestly. Alina didn't change who she was to fit in. She simply grew into the version of herself that had always been waiting beneath the surface. And then came the day, the full circle moment that almost felt too surreal to be true. She walked into a corporate office as the newly hired regional director of operations. It was her first major leadership role, the kind of position that came with power, respect, and authority. But none of those things changed her. What did change, though, was the look on the faces of the people who recognized her. Some of them were old classmates. People who had once mocked her, laughed at her, made her feel like nothing. Now they stood when she entered, they addressed her with formality. They listened when she spoke, and they answered to her. But the most powerful part wasn't the reversal of roles. It wasn't that she had become their boss in the literal sense. It was that she had done so without needing to tear them down, without revenge, without cruelty. She carried herself with the same quiet strength she had always had, only now the world finally saw it. She chose compassion over pride, understanding over anger. And in doing so, she proved something extraordinary, that the greatest victories are not the ones where you defeat others, but the ones where you rise without becoming like them. Alina's story is not just about bullying or success or becoming someone powerful. It's about the slow, unseen journey of building yourself from the inside out. About the kind of success that can't be measured in money or titles, but in integrity and peace of mind. It's about refusing to let other people's cruelty define your future. Yes, they laughed at her. Yes, they called her names. Yes, they tried to make her feel small. But Alina learned something in those lonely hallways that they never did. That quiet perseverance is a form of strength too. That being kind in a world that tried to break you is a form of courage. That choosing grace, even when no one else does, is what makes you truly powerful. So if you're watching or listening to this right now, and you've ever felt like Alina, overlooked, underestimated, left out, remember this: you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to fit in to belong. And you don't need anyone's permission to become the person you were always meant to be. Let their doubt be your drive. Let their silence be your reason to speak up. And let your journey, no matter how long, how hard, how quiet, be the very thing that sets you apart. Because in the end, the people who tried to break you, they don't get to write your story. When Alina stepped into that office for the first time as the new regional director, she didn't walk in with revenge in her heart. She didn't carry a list of names she wanted to get back at, or a hunger to embarrass those who had once mocked her. No, she walked in with something much more powerful: dignity, wisdom, and compassion born from pain she had never wished on anyone. The people in that office, especially the ones who had gone to school with her, the very same ones who once called her names and laughed behind her back, they were stunned into silence. Not because she came in shouting her success, but because she didn't need to. Her presence, her calm, her control, it spoke volumes. She didn't look down on anyone. She didn't call anyone out. She simply walked in, introduced herself with poise, and got to work. And in doing so, she taught everyone in that room what real leadership looked like. True leadership isn't loud. It isn't petty. It doesn't cling to the past just to make others feel small. It rises above. It recognizes hurt, not to return it, but to heal what others might still be carrying. Alina had learned this the hard way. Through years of sitting alone, through moments where even a smile felt like a burden, through those long walks home with tears she never let anyone see. Those moments didn't harden her. They humbled her. They showed her what people need when they're hurting: kindness, understanding, a second chance. And so, when life handed her the power to lead, she chose to lead with grace. There was a day, just weeks into her new role, when one of the old classmates, Darren, knocked on her office door. He looked nothing like the confident, cruel boy from high school. His shoulders were slouched, his voice hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I know we weren't kind to you back then," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Actually, we were awful. I was awful. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Alina could have said so many things. In that moment, she could have reminded him of everything he'd said and done. She could have made him squirm with guilt or asked him how it felt to now be answering to the very person he once tried to break. But she didn't. Instead, she paused, took a breath, and replied, "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." And it did. Not because she needed the apology to move on, she had already done that long ago, but because it confirmed something she had always believed deep down, that people can change. And sometimes when given space, they do. She didn't promote people based on flattery. She didn't play favorites or look for ways to prove herself right. She observed, she listened, she offered guidance where it was needed and praise when it was earned. The interns quickly realized she saw their potential, not just their job titles. The quiet employees noticed she valued ideas, not just confidence. Her meetings were not just about targets and deadlines, they were about culture, support, and respect. People started to work not just for her, but with her. Because Alina had created an environment where no one had to shrink themselves to belong. And that kind of leadership, the kind that lifts people up rather than keeping them down, it changes everything. There were still challenges, of course. Times when decisions had to be made that weren't easy. Situations where people failed her trust or conflict broke out between teams. But even then, Alina didn't rule with fear. She didn't lash out. she handled each situation with fairness. She asked questions. She gave people the chance to explain, to grow, to make things right. Her goal wasn't perfection, it was progress. And in a world where many leaders hide behind authority, she stood out by staying human. Her old classmates, who had once been so quick to judge, now watched her with a mix of admiration and reflection. They started noticing how she treated the receptionist with the same respect she gave the board members. How she always remembered birthdays, how she checked in when someone seemed off, how she gave praise without ever needing to steal the spotlight. And one by one, they began to change too. Not because they were afraid of her power, but because they were inspired by her presence. Alina proved something profound without ever needing to say it out loud, that power doesn't have to be loud or ruthless, that you don't need to hurt others to prove you've healed. That rising above bitterness, truly rising, means you no longer carry the weight of needing revenge. You simply move forward with love, with calm, with grace. And in doing so, you lead others to do the same. Years later, when someone interviewed Alina for a leadership magazine and asked her what made her a good leader, she smiled softly and said, "I remember what it felt like to not be seen, to not be heard, to be dismissed. And I never want anyone under my leadership to feel that way." That was it. No mention of degrees or success metrics or strategy, just compassion. Just humanity. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real leadership is, not how far you go, but how gently you lift others with you along the way. Alina never forgot where she came from, not because she was stuck in the past, but because it reminded her how far she had come. The echoes of those difficult school days never fully disappeared. They would sneak back sometimes in quiet moments. A sudden silence in a meeting room that felt too much like the silence at the lunch table, or a comment that brought back the sting of the names she once heard daily. But the difference now was, she no longer believed those voices. She no longer gave them power. Because over the years, Alina had learned something that changed everything. Your past may shape you, but it does not control you. The cruel things others say about you, they don't become truth unless you let them. The pain they cause, it doesn't define who you are unless you carry it like it belongs to you. And Alina refused to carry what was never hers to begin with. She had every reason to grow bitter, every reason to believe she wasn't enough, but instead she made a choice. Over and over she chose to keep going. Chose to study when she could have given up. Chose to show up when no one expected her to. Chose to believe that somewhere ahead, something better was waiting. And that's the thing about pain. It can break you, yes, but it can also teach you. It can sharpen your vision, focus your heart, and push you toward things that comfort never could. Alina's strength didn't come from being lucky. It came from being determined. Every time life knocked her down, she stood back up, not because she was fearless, but because she had a reason to keep moving, a future only she could create. It's easy to think that our beginnings determine our endings. That if you grow up being ignored, you'll never be heard. That if people label you as nothing, that's all you'll ever be. But that's a lie Alina stopped believing the moment she decided her story wasn't going to be written by someone else's pen. She started writing it herself, slowly, one small step at a time, filling in the pages with every sacrifice, every late night, every quiet act of self-belief that no one else saw. Her success wasn't a single moment of arrival, it was a long road built on invisible choices. The choice to try again. The choice to trust herself. The choice to let go of shame and hold on to hope. Even as she moved up in life, graduated, found better jobs, started leading teams. She carried her past with humility, not humiliation. She didn't hide the fact that she came from struggle. In fact, she honored it. Because she knew her strength didn't come despite her past. It came through it. It was her hard beginning that made her gentle with others. It was her lonely moments that made her attentive to those who felt unseen. It was her pain that taught her to lead with purpose, not pride. And maybe that's the most powerful part of her story. Not that she made it to the top, but that she brought the lessons of her past with her and let them make her better. Not bitter. One day, during a leadership seminar, A young girl nervously raised her hand during the Q&A and said, "What if people only ever see where I come from? What if they already think I've failed before I even begin?" Alina paused for a moment, then answered gently, "Then let them watch. Let them watch you grow. Let them watch you rise. Let them watch you prove them wrong, not with anger, not with revenge, but by quietly becoming everything they said you couldn't be." That answer stayed with many people long after the seminar ended, because it was real. It came from someone who had lived it. Someone who had been underestimated, overlooked, written off, and who still, somehow, became something remarkable. Asterisk, you see, it's not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about refusing to be trapped by it. Alina didn't wake up one day and forget the pain. She just stopped letting it steer her. She chose to use her past as a lesson, not a label. And that choice changed her life. It gave her the power to walk into boardrooms with confidence, to speak to crowds with conviction, to mentor others with patience. And most of all, it gave her peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that the worst thing that happened to you is not the end of your story. It's just a chapter, one that leads to better ones. If you keep turning the page, asterisk, so if you're someone who's been told you're not enough, someone who carries the weight of where you came from like it's a curse, please hear this. Your past is not your prison. It's not your destiny. It's just your beginning, and beginnings are supposed to be messy. They're supposed to be hard, because they prepare you for the person you're meant to become. Alina came from loneliness, from struggle, from pain, and still she became a light. For others, not because it was easy, but because she chose to never stop moving forward. Asterisk, you get to decide what comes next. Not your bullies, not your critics, not your history, you asterisk, because in the end, your past doesn't define your future. You do, asterisk, if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to share this video with your fans, to like the video and subscribe to Everyday Grace Stories. We'll keep bringing you more real, emotional stories, because a little grace every day, asterisk, can change a life. Asterisk, asterisk.